Welcome back to another Recon podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we continue to talk about the stock market. I just want to remind everybody that this video is not designed to give investment advice. Its purpose is educational only. This video and other videos in this playlist are designed to teach about theories of investing. If you want investment advice, please see a professional. All right, so on previous videos, we talked about the firm foundation philosophy of investing, and we said that's our argument. Firm foundationalists would not agree with this. The argument that we're making right now, the random walk argument, is that firm foundation really doesn't work because it would require knowing what earnings and dividends are going to be in the future, and nobody can know what those earnings and dividends are going to be in the future. You can't predict the future. So firm foundation is not going to work in terms of helping you, pick the right stocks, the right companies that are going to do well and avoid the companies that are going to do poorly. So that doesn't work according to the castle in the air or according to the random walk theory. Now, the castle in the air also does not work if you accept the random walk theory. Castle in the air doesn't work because they rely on predicting the future using graphs, looking for price patterns in order to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And the random walk guys say that doesn't work either. You just can't, according to the random walk guy, you can't know what the future is going to be. So then the question is, well, what do you do? How do you invest then? And so we said on the previous video that to think about investing from a random walk point of view, we first have to think of the concept of total return. How much is a stock returning, is a company returning each year? What is their percent return? And so we did a video on how to calculate that total return. And we said we can track that total return over time. So a company might have a total return of 10% one year, 3% the next year, 18% the next year, whatever. And we can track total return over time. Now what we want to do is we want to say, well, how's a random walk person going to try to then, if we can't figure out what stocks to buy, if we can't use firm foundation castle in the air to do that, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to try to manage risk. That's the whole idea of the random walk theory, is we're going to try to manage risk. Okay? And risk, you can't manage risk unless you calculate it. So how are you going to calculate risk? Risk is calculated by using a mathematical concept that we call standard deviation. And standard deviation, the concept of standard deviation, is it is the average deviation or average distance from the average. That's a confusing concept. So to understand this, we're going to start by doing an example of it. So first of all, the formula. The formula for standard deviation, it's a very confusing formula, and I don't want to spend too much time. I'm going to spend 2 videos on this concept, and then we got to move on past it. But standard deviation is calculated by taking your total return you look at all the data that you have, and you look at your total return in your first year of data, minus your average return, and then square it. So we want to see how much do we deviate from the average. I'm going to do an example of this here in a minute. And then we square it. Square it is to get rid of the negatives. Well, again, we'll look at that in a couple minutes. Plus the return in year 2 minus the average return, square it. Plus the return in year 3, and I didn't continue writing this, but you would do this, keep doing this for the number of years that you have. You would keep following this same pattern. Then you divide that by the number of years of data that you have, and then at the very end, take the square root of that final answer. Take the square root of that final answer. And that's going to give you something called the standard deviation. So let me do an example of this. Let's say that we have data from 3 years. Let's say we have 3 years of data on some company. Okay? And let's say year number 1. So we're going to have 3 years of data. Year 1, year 2, and year 3. And then this is going to be your percent return, or your let me actually write it this way. Let's say that's your total return. And let's say the total return for this company in year 1 was 5%. This company made 5%. In year 2, they made 15%. And in year 3, they make 10%. They earn 10%. Okay, let's say that's the total return for this company for those 3 years. Now, the first thing that we have to do is we have to calculate the average. So the average is calculated by simply taking the total returns each year divided by the number of years, which is 3. So we'd simply do this. We would do, the average would be calculated by taking 5 plus the second year, which was 15, plus the third year, which was 10, and then you divide by the number of years. There were 3 years of data. And then you add those up and you get an average. So let's see, that's simply going to be, 5 plus 15 plus 10 is equal to 30 divided by 3. And your average return is going to be 10% per year. Notice when I do all my calculations, I don't include the percent sign. I'm ignoring the percent sign when I do my calculation. All right, now let's calculate the standard deviation from that. So the standard deviation, this is going to be calculated. It's going to be confusing to do. The standard deviation is the return in year 1. Okay, that's this. The return in year 1, which is 5%. We return 5% in year 1 minus the average return, which was 10%. So what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how far were we from the average. Well, we would do the return that year minus the average. That's our distance from the average. That's how far we were from the average. And then we don't want to deal with negatives. So this is going to be 5 minus 10, which is negative 5. I don't want to deal with negatives. There's a mathematical reason for that we're not going to get into. But to avoid dealing with negatives, we're going to square it. Okay, we're going to just square it, and then the negative will disappear. Plus, in year 2, we're going to have the return in year 2 is 15%. So we're going to do the same thing, 15%, minus the average, which was 10. So that year, we beat the average by 5. We were 5 percentage points above the average. Square it. Plus, year 3 is a 10% return minus the average, which was 10%. So we did exactly equal to the average that year. And then we square that. Divide all of that. We're going to divide all of that by the number of years. How many years of data do we have? We have 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 years of data. So we're going to divide by 3. And at the very end, we're going to take the square root of all that. We're going to take the square root of that whole thing. Okay? Now, let's talk about these steps. So my next step, okay, so for this first one, it's going to be 5 minus 10 is 5. Actually, it's negative 5. Square it is 25. Okay, so we got 25. Plus, year 2, 15 minus 10 is 5, and square it. So that's going to be 25 as well. That's going to be 25. And then year 3 is 10 minus 10 is 0, squared is 0, so that's going to be plus 0. All divided by 5, all divided by 3, 3 years of data, 1, 2, 3. So all divided by 3, and then we take the square root at the end. Okay, the square root is the last step that we do. It's important that we do these steps in order. First, you got to do what's in the parentheses. Then you got to add them together and divide by 3. And then you take the square root at the end. So let's see, this is going to be 50 divided by 3. 50 divided by 3 is 16.67. So this is going to be equal to the square root of 16.67. It's going to be the square root of 16.67. And the square root of 16.67 is 4.08. So my final answer is going to be, my standard deviation is going to be 4.08. 4.08. Okay, that's going to be my final answer for the standard deviation. Now let's just talk a little bit about what that means. We have two numbers here. We have the average, which is 10%, and we have the standard deviation, which is 4.08. Okay, what that really means is this. This company, this stock for which we have historical total return data on, this stock returns an average of 10% per year, and its average distance from the average on any one given year, we expect it to be 4% above that or below that 10%. That's how much it deviates in any one given year. Okay? Its average return is 10% per year. Some years it's 4% above that. Some years it's 4% below that. So it might be one year it might be 10%, the next year it might be 14%, the next year it might be 6%. Okay? But it's usually within 4 points above or below this 10% return. Okay? This is how on any average year, this is how far it deviates from the actual return deviates from the average. Okay? The average is 10% per year, but on any one given year, it might deviate 4 points above or below that average. Okay? That's kind of a confusing concept, and we're going to spend more time on that on another video. So for now, we're really just kind of doing calculations. On the next videos, we're going to take a look at what these numbers actually mean and start to understand how they can help us with managing stock portfolios. Okay, this has been Mr. Hagan on another Econ podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next Econ podcast.